Why you should never use garden soil indoors. Hey plant lovers, welcome back to Earthly Delights, the place where we make indoor gardening simple, inspiring, and frustration-free. If you're someone who loves surrounding yourself with lush greenery but constantly struggles with yellowing leaves, drooping stems, or mysterious pests, then today's video is for you. Let me ask you a quick question. Have you ever thought, hey, plants thrive in garden soil outside, so why not bring that same nutrient-rich compost indoors? Sounds logical, right? Well, that was exactly what I thought when I first started my indoor plant journey. And let me tell you, it was a disaster. I've been growing houseplants for years now, and I've learned one painful truth. Using regular soil or garden compost for your indoor plants is one of the worst mistakes you can make. I've made that mistake. I've watched beautiful, healthy plants slowly wilt and die before my eyes. And today, I'm here to make sure you don't have to go through the same heartbreak. In this video, I'm going to break down exactly why garden soil is a silent killer for indoor plants, how it leads to root rot, pest infestations, and mold problems, and most importantly, what you should be using instead. So stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to create the perfect potting mix to keep your plants thriving for years to come. Oh, and before we dive in, if you love learning about plants and want to grow healthier, happier greenery at home, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We post weekly tips to help you master indoor gardening. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Alright, let's get into it. Let's get into the real problem with using garden soil indoors. At first glance, it seems like a great idea, right? It's full of nutrients. It's what plants grow in outside. And best of all, it's free. But here's the truth. What works for outdoor plants does not work the same way inside your home. And the biggest issue? Drainage. Picture this. You take a handful of rich, dark soil from your garden, the same kind that makes your outdoor plants flourish, and you pot up your beautiful indoor greenery with it. At first, everything looks great, but then, just a few weeks later, you notice the leaves are turning yellow. The stems start drooping. No matter how carefully you water, something feels off, and then, before you know it, your once thriving plant is sitting in a pot of black, mushy roots, completely suffocated. That, my friends, is root rot, and it is the silent killer of houseplants everywhere. But here's the thing. It's not just about watering too much. Root rot isn't caused by water alone. It happens when there's not enough oxygen in the soil. And guess what? Garden soil is notorious for holding onto moisture for way too long, leaving no space for air pockets. Without airflow, plant roots suffocate, and that's when bacteria and fungi start their feast, slowly eating away at the roots until they're completely destroyed. Now, let's compare this to what happens outside. In a garden, the soil has natural drainage helpers. The sun speeds up evaporation. The wind keeps things aerated, and the worms and microorganisms underground help break things down in a balanced way. But indoors, none of that exists. There's no strong sunlight drying things out quickly, no wind gently moving through the soil, no helpful earthworms working behind the scenes. Instead, the soil just stays wet, and the longer it stays wet, the faster it becomes a breeding ground for bacteria, fungus, and worst of all, pests. And let me tell you, once you bring in a pest problem, it spreads fast. We'll talk more about that later. But for now, just remember this. Indoor plants need airflow in their roots, and garden soil is simply too dense and heavy to allow that to happen. Now, if you're already panicking, don't worry, I've got you covered. In just a bit, I'll tell you exactly what you should be using instead. But first, let's talk about another major issue that comes with using garden soil inside: mold. Great. Now, let's talk about something that every indoor gardener dreads: mold. If you've ever looked at the surface of your houseplant's soil and noticed a fuzzy, white layer forming, you've already seen the problem firsthand. Mold thrives in damp, poorly aerated environments, which, as we just discussed, is exactly what happens when you use dense garden soil indoors. And while mold might seem like just an aesthetic issue, trust me, it's much more than that. First, let's talk about why this happens. When you use garden soil inside, You're introducing organic matter, things like decomposed leaves, wood particles, and tiny bits of plant material that naturally break down over time. Outdoors, this process is balanced by the presence of beneficial bacteria, insects, and environmental conditions that help regulate decomposition. But indoors, that process gets thrown completely out of balance. Without sunlight to dry things out or wind to keep the surface aerated, the organic material in garden soil starts holding onto moisture for too long. And when soil stays damp, it creates the perfect breeding ground for mold and fungi. If you've ever had a plant sitting in a warm, humid corner of your home and noticed white mold creeping across the top of the soil, you've seen exactly what I mean. Now, here's the real problem. Mold doesn't just stay in the soil. Once it takes hold, it can start affecting the air quality in your home. And for people who are sensitive to allergens, that's a big deal. Plus, mold can weaken your plants over time, making them more vulnerable to other issues like root rot, nutrient deficiencies, and, you guessed it, pests. Speaking of pests, let's talk about one of the most annoying consequences of using garden soil indoors: fungus gnats. If you've ever been watching TV, minding your own business, only to have a tiny, buzzing insect fly straight into your face, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. These little pests are attracted to the damp, organic rich environment of garden soil, and once they move in, they can be a nightmare to get rid of. But don't worry, coming up next, I'll show you exactly how to avoid these issues altogether and create a soil mix that keeps your plants happy, healthy, and free from mold and pests. Stick around, because this next part will change the way you care for your houseplants forever. Awesome. Now, let's dive into one of the most frustrating and downright infuriating issues that come with using garden soil indoors: fungus gnats. If you've ever had tiny black flies hovering around your plants, landing on your face while you're trying to relax, or, worst of all, multiplying so fast that you feel like they've taken over your home, then you already know how much of a nightmare these pests can be. But here's the thing: fungus gnats don't just appear out of nowhere. They are directly linked to the soil you're using. And if you've been using garden soil or compost in your pots, then congratulations, you've been rolling out the red carpet for these unwanted guests. See, fungus gnats are attracted to moist, organic rich soil because their larvae feed on fungi and decaying matter. And what do we know about garden soil? It holds moisture for too long, it's packed with organic material, and it lacks proper aeration, all of which create the ideal breeding ground for fungus gnats to thrive. And let's be clear, these little pests don't just annoy you, they also damage your plants. While the adult gnats might seem harmless, it's their larvae that are the real problem. These tiny creatures burrow into the soil and start feeding on delicate plant roots, weakening your plants over time and making them more vulnerable to diseases. I learned this lesson the hard way. A few years ago, I had a beautiful collection of pothos, ferns, and peace lilies. I thought I was doing everything right, watering carefully, making sure they had plenty of light, but suddenly, I noticed little black bugs everywhere. Within weeks, I was seeing yellowing leaves, stunted growth, and plants that just weren't thriving the way they should. That's when I realized, it wasn't my watering schedule. It wasn't my lighting setup. It was the soil. So, what's the solution? How do you stop these pests from taking over your indoor jungle? Well, stick around, because up next, I'll show you exactly what to use instead of garden soil to keep your plants and your home gnat-free. Great, now that we've covered the dangers of fungus gnats, let's talk about the real solution: what you should be using instead of garden soil to keep your plants thriving indoors. So, if garden soil is too dense, holds too much moisture, and attracts pests, what's the alternative? The answer is a well-draining, aerated potting mix, one that gives your plants the moisture they need without suffocating the roots. And the key to creating the perfect mix? Air pockets. Think about how plants grow in their natural environments. Tropical plants, like monsteras and philodendrons, don't grow in dense, compact soil. They grow in loose, airy, nutrient-rich material that allows their roots to breathe. And desert plants? They're used to fast-draining, gritty soil that prevents water from sitting too long. This is exactly what we need to recreate indoors. So instead of garden soil, here's what I recommend. First, let's talk about perlite. If you've never used perlite before, let me introduce you to your new best friend. Perlite is a lightweight, volcanic rock that has been heated until it expands, creating a super porous structure. The magic of perlite is that it allows water to drain quickly while keeping air pockets in the soil, so your plant's roots can breathe properly. If you've ever struggled with overwatering, adding perlite to your mix is an absolute game changer. Next, there's coconut coir, one of my favorite alternatives to traditional soil. Made from the outer husk of coconuts, coconut coir is a sustainable, lightweight, and moisture-retaining material that doesn't compact the way garden soil does. It keeps the roots hydrated without drowning them, making it a fantastic base for your indoor plant mix. And if you're growing tropical plants like monsteras or anthuriums, adding orchid bark or coconut husks can make a huge difference. These chunky materials mimic the natural environment of epiphytic plants, allowing for extra airflow around the roots. The chunkier the mix, the happier your plant will be. But what about succulents and cacti? These plants need an even grittier, faster draining mix, so I recommend using sand and pumice along with perlite. This combination prevents water from sitting too long in the soil, which is crucial for avoiding root rot in dry-loving plants. So, the big question: how do you put it all together? Well, in the next section, I'll break down the best soil mix ratios for different types of plants, so you'll know exactly what to use to keep your indoor jungle thriving. Alright, plant lovers, we've covered why garden soil is a disaster for indoor plants. From root rot to mold, to those annoying little fungus gnats, we've also explored the best alternatives: a well-draining, aerated mix that keeps your plants thriving without the constant battle against moisture buildup and pests. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Do I really need to go through all this trouble just to repot my plants? And my answer? Absolutely, yes, because once you switch to the right soil mix, you're going to notice a huge difference. Your plants will look healthier, they'll grow faster, and, best of all, you won't have to deal with constant problems like yellowing leaves, mushy stems, or gnats flying around your face while you're trying to enjoy your morning coffee. So if you've been struggling with your houseplants, this might just be the missing piece of the puzzle. Try out these soil alternatives. Experiment with different ratios based on your plant's needs, and watch your indoor jungle flourish like never before. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Earthly Delights. We share weekly tips and deep dives into all things houseplants, so if you want to turn your space into a thriving green sanctuary, you're in the right place. Let me know in the comments, what's your go-to potting mix? Have you ever made the mistake of using garden soil indoors? I'd love to hear about your experiences. And if you're curious about even more plant care tips, check out our next video where we break down the biggest watering mistakes that might be harming your plants. Thanks for watching, and as always, happy growing.